I watched them crop me from my own head table and call it community, while a permit they filed named them lead on my property. In the kitchen, my chipped mug cooled beside the certified deed as I stacked plates because order was the last kindness. Brent called irasure logistics, and Nora called it flexibility, turning ownership into labor. So I opened the binder, froze drafts, reclaimed the chair, and set carving on schedule. When polite convenience deletes a person, do you stand down or stand with proof? I am Raymond Keene, retired supply sergeant, precise with lists and mornings. Saturdays begin on autopilot with coffee, a ledger, and the chipped mug, while my brass pocket watch ticks beside the columns I square with steady breaths. The old knee eases if I keep moving, so I sort groceries, labels forward, and wipe the lemon-oiled living room before straightening my wife's photo in the window light. The family thread pings, floods with emojis, then goes quiet. I set the phone face down and jot household requests in the fridge notebook: bulbs, batteries, a gate latch, good charcoal. Readiness keeps flare-ups short. I tighten the porch bracket, wipe the sink, line towels, then check the wall calendar I filled in careful ink. Birthdays, oil changes, seasonal checks, the mortgage draft from my account, with proof filed in a labeled envelope and spare lines left for when they finally share the load. Brent shuffles in, eyes on his screen, asks about propane. I answer, and he's gone before the sentence lands. Lena breezes through, kisses my forehead, mentions folding chairs, asks for ice, the good kind, and vanishes again. I write ice in block letters so the errand holds weight. While I count plates, a banner flashes. Head count confirmed for tonight, then disappears like a word swallowed mid-breath. Trash tied, blue bin squared to the curb, I meet our neighbor Nora Hill. She chirps about parking spilling over and laughs when I say I'll keep the driveway open, eyes already back on her phone. My chest tightens, then loosens to an 8 count I learned years ago. In the workshop that smells of cedar and oil, I set the grocery list by my carpenter's square, sort hinges, and let dust settle. My service jacket hangs bagged. Medals stay boxed. The folded flag case keeps its place above the books. The watch snaps open. I sketch seating, chairs, shade, figure the yard fits 12 if I shift the grill 3 feet. The grill wobbles, missing a foot cap, so I shim it with cedar and call for a second pair of hands. A door closes, music starts, laughter answers. I scrub the grates until metal shines and last week's smoke gives way to citrus. Promise drifts when plans live on phones I don't hold. Inside, I stack napkins in 5s, rinse berries, and open a message assigning roles to everyone, except the man on the deed. I'm listed for ice twice and trash last. My shoulders pull inward. The watch's click, usually kind, feels sharp. Lena pops in, warns parking will be tight, suggests I leave the driveway for guests. I offer to shuttle elders and get a thin nod. She mentions extra coolers, forgets the sentence. Brent frowns at warm Coronas, wonders if I remembered ice, and is already texting backup. I steady my hands like I used to steady a map, log the propane refill in charcoal, add paper goods because dignity rides on small comforts, then notice my name nowhere except consumables and cleanup. A breeze lifts the curtain. I flip the watch, ritual smoothing small snags, and plot shade angles and a safe extension run to the cooler by the east fence. Trips ruin evenings. Caution rarely gets applause when success erases evidence. Nora calls from the sidewalk, asks when toasts start. Someone told her there would be a little speech. I'm not looped in. She praises the yard. Good hosting, a word that lands heavy when the host has no chair. I wash the mug, tell the photo I'm doing my best, and count plates, guessing at 40 again. Names flash and fade in the thread. Mine never lands. I carry the cooler to the porch and wait for a voice to claim it. The street smells of cut grass and charcoal. The summer script skips my mark. I set the cooler where shade will hold longest and note, with the watch at noon, that the day plans to move without asking. Back in the kitchen, I draw a line in the ledger. Chairs for guests. Chair for me. Proof of my place. I underline it. Quiet work shouldn't rattle a house. Not today. I center my brass keyring on the counter and listen until my breathing steadies. Footsteps go upstairs. A laugh peals and dims. Hinges confess where doors are. None are barriers when you know their tired sound. I trim frayed welcome mat corners, wipe 2 folding tables found dusty against the garage wall, and keep moving because clean edges change how people behave. The sun slides a hand's width while I set cutlery. The ice run can wait. Last night's trays crack into bags and thud into the cooler like small white bricks. Finality belongs to decisions I haven't voiced. I leave the watch open on the mantel like a small flag and align glasses by shape. I can see the evening map now, rough and precise, hands moving, voices praising the spread, thanks given to everyone but me. The ledger knows the difference between paid and promised when night cools. I fold a towel square, feel the house hum with preparations that no longer hinge on me, and feel the space around me shrink a degree. I breathe, watch the second hand cross 12, and keep the decision behind my teeth. I sweep counters after lunch and feel heat rise along my neck. The house hums sharper, like wires pulled tight. I steady my breath, open the ledger, and start a page labeled Requests and Answers. The thread lights with updates I can't decipher. I send a check-in for head count, timing, and access. Icons bounce, then resolve into a vague thumbs up, which I note in the margin. I align glassware, stack napkins in 4s, and log rising costs for propane, charcoal, paper goods, and a bulb kit. The driveway stays clear per this morning's request. I slide the trash bins to widen turning clearance. Nora pauses at the walkway, predicts overflow, and hints our driveway should help. Her eyes avoid mine. I underline driveway reserved for host. Folding chairs I cleaned line the windows. I match cushions and set one beside the head table for me. The calendar shows draft tomorrow and utilities Friday. The receipts envelope is ready, but receipts tell one side only. A printed seating chart appears. I scan for my name and find none. Brent breezes through proclaiming hosts float. He points me towards staging drinks at the sink. I ask for a head table seat. He claims standing keeps lanes clear. I log seating denied. My throat tightens, then loosens. I place a plate, knife, folded napkin, and a small name card I printed. Lena arrives with flowers, asks for clear aisles and music cues, and says speeches follow dessert. I underline speeches after dessert. I walk the perimeter, count steps between coolers and stations, set the cooler near the east fence, and test the plug. Water and power don't mix. I carry my chair to the head table and square it. Brent lifts it, slides it to the wall, and says a sponsor couple sits there, pointing to a chart with a blank square. I return the chair and leave my card under the plate, then log moved chair back to wall. Nora suggests hosts stay visible near doors. Visible without a seat means standing service. I sketch a boundary map. One chair for owner at head table. Driveway lane labeled no block. Emergency access. Final decision. Paper needs backing, so I pull a small reserved sign from storage and place it at the driveway corner. Nora chirps that overflow needs grace and waves away. I rehearse the playlist. Someone hijacks the speaker with a second device. I remove pairing and set a physical lock, then log device override and potential toast conflict. Ice moves to the cooler. A picture flashes in my head of a head table without my chair. Shame tightens. I clean the carving knife, set its guard, and write who carves in the margin. Ceremony reveals belonging. The chart gains stickers for late confirmations and acknowledgements. My name still absent because hosts apparently circulate. The deed upstairs carries signatures that say otherwise. I print a card with my name and homeowner beneath it and slide it under the napkin. Brent lifts the napkin, slides my card toward the pass, and says logistics outrank labels. Logistics without people is erasure. I ease my grip, breathe, and log third removal. 4 o'clock nears. Cars idle at the curb. 2 SUVs angle across both exits. I point to the reserved sign and explain emergency access. They wave it off. Someone said the driveway was free. I fetch cones, paint a lane to the street, add a small platform step to protect the threshold, and log cones placed at 420. Lena returns with a clipboard, pushes ice at 7:30 to avoid an 8 o'clock scramble. 7:30 overlaps toasts. I offer 7 while staying close to the table. She smiles thinly and says, "Picture timing needs everyone in frame." I log timed errand during toasts. Notes alone won't hold ground, so I set a plain chair behind the head table where cameras miss it, align the angle, then slide it 2 feet forward, and tap the leg once. Brent calls it backstage clutter and suggests storage. Storage becomes erasure. The tap feels like a stake taking ground. Guests arrive with dishes and light jokes about heat. I welcome, label pies, direct to water and shade, and keep count silently. The head table fills with familiar names. An open square gleams like a missing tooth. I place a spoon, then a plate, then my card under the lip. A child reaches. I trade a cookie and return the plate, leave the spoon heavy enough to declare presence. Music lands on time. The hour braids conversations. I stand behind the head table like a shadow cast by labor. A neighbor asks who carves. I say the plan is undecided and set the knife where the space invites. Cloth pulls back. Decision presses forward. The playlist softens. Dessert and words approach. Clarity settles. Courtesy has been mistaken for vacancy. The first clash has landed. Avoidance is finished. I choose one anchored step. I draft a boundary list in my ledger. Seat at head table, driveway lane, playlist control, carving, and write outcomes beside each. I move through the yard once more, confirm cones, test the plug, and check timing against the oven clock. The speaker lock holds. Brent passes, lifts the napkin again, and palms my card toward the pass. I replace it without comment. Nora floats with a clipboard, whispering micro-adjustments that cost me the chair. I undo them. The chart still omits my name. The envelopes upstairs still bear mine in ink. 2 more cars drift toward the driveway, see the cones, and reroute. I set a lane, steady my breath, and keep my hands visible. The head table is almost full. I bring my chair forward, square it, center my plate, and rest a hand beside the card. The room can accept this or launch another push. I'm ready either way. The playlist cue for dessert glows on the timer. I hold my ground with a plate, a chair, and ink. I salt the grill and feel the day's weight settle between my shoulders. The yard smells like charcoal and cut grass as I scan doors, calendars, and accounts, like checkpoints. I mark where time will break if someone nudges the schedule off-center. The ledger opens to a fresh page labeled Boundaries, Seating, Driveway, Toasts, Carving. Posts fall without a hammer, so I pick it up. I carry the head table chair back into position, tuck the plate, slide my name card under the lip, and anchor the leg with a felt pad. The playlist timer stays pinned to 8 while dessert waits under lids. I wipe the knife, check the propane gauge and spare strap, and note both locks confirmed. The pocket watch ticks in my palm. Appeals end here. Decisions need paper. I log into the bank and pause auto drafts. Utilities move to paper invoices. I set reminders that chime my phone. The mortgage draft is due tomorrow. I enter a stop order. I print confirmations, clip them under household agreements, and pull the stamped deed from the property folder, running a finger over the county seal. Proof needs light at the right hour, so I slip deed and confirmations into a slim envelope and pocket the watch. Outside, I widen the emergency lane, shift cones, and reset the sign. 2 cars nose toward the driveway as if rules were suggestions. I point to the reserved sign, explain access, and note plate numbers when a driver shrugs and blocks both exits. I plant a cone dead center. Brakes squeal. Choices reroute. Exhaustion follows relief as ovens cycle and laughter stacks. I carry a binder to the hall table, add a sheet titled Event Logistics, and include a line, Carving by homeowner at 8:16. A neighbor reads and nods. Nora murmurs that committees prefer flexibility on ceremonial roles. I circle ceremonial in red. I call the county. The recorder's office is open 1 more hour. Haste kills caution, so I gather deed, confirmations, ID, and the watch, lock the speaker, cue the playlist, and tell Lena I have a brief errand. Ice can wait. I drive downtown, park, and request a certified deed copy. The clerk raises an eyebrow at my address and says an event permit lists another contact as lead. I ask to see it, and read Brent as coordinator, Nora as liaison. The description calls this a sponsor appreciation, not a block party, with a sponsor matching the decals on Brent's truck. One line hits hardest: use of homeowner premises with prior consent on file. I request copies and watch the red stamp land. The midpoint is paper saying something different than smiles. Revelation needs action, so I form a simple plan. Seat secured, driveway cleared, toasts timed, carving performed, finances shifted to mailed confirmations. I drive home slower than urgency and find the driveway blocked again. I slide the sign aside, catch the driver, point to cones and lane, and ask him to choose between easy and legal access. He moves the truck. The head table gleams. My plate sits on the service pass again. I return it to my spot. A new card appears naming a sponsor couple. The blank square became someone Brent knows. I slide the deed copy into the binder and set it on the head table with the property page visible. Lena mentions optics. I answer that the owner will occupy one chair, as marked and documented. Brent frowns, laughs lightly, and suggests hosts keep circulation loose. I summarize the 4 points and add that financial drafts are paused pending written agreements. His eyes sharpen at paused. He suggests we talk later. Guests stream in with pies and smiles. The music stays on schedule because locks and timers ignore social currents. Nora circulates, whispering adjustments that erase my chair. I replace the chair, fix the leg pad, and set the plate without commentary. People read the binder and nod. A neighbor squeezes my elbow, says clear lanes and plans matter, then glances from binder to table and answers his own question about sponsors and owners. I take the carving knife, check guard and balance, align boards and towels, and set the tray near the head table. The playlist softens for toasts. Brent taps his phone and pockets it with a smile. A man in branded polos arrives. Nora gestures toward sponsor names. I meet them on the porch before Momentum rewrites facts. I introduce myself as owner and coordinator of safety and schedule, then add that sponsor appreciation follows dessert if everyone remains seated. He nods, thanks me for tidy access lanes, and waits. The binder glints in the evening light. 2 guests read and widen space for my chair. Nora's clipboard tilts. Her mouth tightens. Muscle memory from night operations returns. I carry the chair forward, settle it square, and place my name card on the plate. Brent says the camera will hate an extra body. I answer that safety, schedule, and owner presence lead tonight. The toasts block hits on time. The polo man looks to me. I lift a palm for weight and gesture toward the binder instead of raising my voice. The room quiets. I lift the carving knife, set it down so metal kisses linen, then sit and straighten the napkin. Balance tilts back toward center. The first win arrives quietly and changes the room's posture. My chest opens. Heat drains. Brent's smile cools. He texts again and scans the driveway. New headlights angle toward the cones. Dessert lids lift. Guests lean forward. A seam of tension threads gate to head table. My chair holds. The plate stays put. The binder remains open. So I keep my hand steady on the linen and wait for the next push to declare itself. The new headlights cut across the cones and slow, like a decision reconsidered. I keep my hands flat on linen and let my breath even itself. And I hold the room's gaze by doing almost nothing, which changes everything fast. The sponsor representative lingers near the gate and waits for a cue with patience. Nora hovers beside him and studies the head table as if reading a map. However, my chair holds steady. The binder stays open, and the carving knife glints. The playlist keeps its tempo, and conversations braid back together around steady rhythm markers. I rise only to fill water at the corner pitcher, then sit again. And I keep posture loose because command without kindness curdles quickly under summer lights. Brent watches from the porch rail and scrolls his phone with practiced nonchalance. He nods at Nora, then walks the driveway line like a foreman inspecting seams. However, he avoids the binder's page because paper tilts leverage away from quick talk. Guests settle into plates while the sun slides toward the fence and golden's edges. I choose silence as policy and let it do the heavy lifting tonight. And I focus on essentials I can touch, not optics that evaporate under heat. The carving board waits, towels folded, tray aligned, and the knife balanced perfectly. I breathe through the count and glance once at the driveway lane remaining clear. However, Two teens drift toward the cones, carrying folding signs and grins that expect indulgence. I stand, step to the edge, and point kindly to the emergency channel kept open. They nod, shrug, and carry signs toward the side yard, for harmless storage instead. And I return to my chair without commentary, because routine beats drama by miles. Lena approaches with a clipboard and a smile that strains around the corners. She mentions picture flow again, and wonders if we can lift the chair later. However, I shake my head once and say the plate will remain where marked. She exhales, almost laughs, then retreats toward guests who want ice and napkins quickly. And I notice the tremor in my hands has left as cleanly as a tide. The room begins to accept new terms when repeated gently and backed by proof. I let that settle and check the timer that guards the toasts and carving. However, a group collects near the gate and turns toward the porch in expectation. Brent steps up on the threshold like a man preparing a calm announcement sequence. He speaks warmly about community and effort, and thanks, and light-hearted sponsor appreciation. And he gestures toward the head table with a host's flourish that expects compliance. I stay seated and rest 2 fingers on the binder like anchoring a corner. The room glances at me, then at the page, then back to the porch. However, Brent feels the drag and pivots toward dessert first, buying himself time. Plates lift, lids shift, and sugar steadies the crowd with predictable grace and calm. I take the carving knife, test the balance, and place blade to board gently, and I announce with a steady voice that carving begins on schedule, then rise. The sponsor representative nods, smiles, and defers with visible relief and gratitude. He tells Nora they can speak after the carving, short and sweet, no rush. However, Nora attempts a quieter reroute, murmuring about lighting windows and angles for photos. I breathe, hold her eyes, and say owner presence anchors safety and timing tonight. She swallows her next suggestion and records a note that likely reads inflexible, then moves. And I feel self-respect reappear like a muscle returning after weeks in a sling. The first slices land clean, even, and constant, and conversation lowers willingly around ceremony. I serve head table first, left to right, steady tempo, no wasted motion anywhere. However, Brent leans close to a guest and whispers something while studying my plate. I finish the first platter and set it on the tray without looking up, and I move the second joint to the board and let the rhythm dictate pace. The platter rounds the table, returns empty, and I load the next without pause. The playlist softens as planned, and the cooling evening lifts a pleasant breeze across napkins. However, the porch light flickers, then dies, then flares, then settles to a dull hum. I mark the surge mentally and keep blades away from any speculative darkness edge. And I switch on the small lantern under the table because backup prevents apologies later. A child trips near the cones, and I hear the stumble, then the quick recovery. I look up, see him stand, and see the lane still open and clear. However, laughter ripples as if the stumble were comic relief, and the moment passes easily. Brent returns to the head table and rests a palm near my plate's corner. I ignore the drift of that hand and keep serving with clockwork evenness and patience, and I reach the last platter and settle the knife in place to breathe again. Guests lean back, satisfied, while the sponsor representative waits politely by the gate. However, Lena approaches with a fresh clipboard page and points at a revised order. Her page swaps carving to earlier, toasts to later, sponsor remarks to immediately now. I tilt my head, read the page, and recognize the stamp from the office this afternoon. And I smile without teeth because the permit copy rides behind my binder's first clip. I remove the permit copy and slide it on top of her page, visible and crisp. The two documents contradict each other neatly, and the table notices without any coaching. However, Lena's face tightens, then smooths, then she thanks me, and withdraws quickly. The sponsor representative watches this exchange, then motions politely that I should continue leading. I nod once and invite him to close the evening after our toasts conclude, and he agrees at once, relieved to follow rather than wrestle in someone else's yard. The breeze lifts the tablecloth edge and cools my forearms, steadying my breath. I note a soft ache in my lower back and adjust posture to neutral. However, relief never lasts long when someone believes optics outrank ownership and safety. Brent steps forward with a small portable amp and sets it on the porch rail. He reaches for the speaker cable and frowns at my physical lock, then glances around, and he pulls a second mic from a bag and powers the amp with a grin. The porch hums, then squeals, then drops to a droning buzz that jars the quiet. Guests wince, kids cover ears, and shoulders rise as people wait for normal again. However, Brent speaks into the spare mic and praises the sponsor's generosity loudly. I lift my hand, palm down, and point to the emergency lane and head table. My eyes hold his, and I shake my head slowly once, with no heat, and I reach under the table and flip the porch circuit to reset the interference. The amp coughs, then dies, then returns at half power and a tolerable tone. Brent tries again, but the room has shifted and no longer floats toward his script. However, Lena brings him a plate and whispers that the sponsor prefers our timing tonight. He nods tightly, smiles too bright, and steps back to the rail with the amp. And I announce toasts with a steady cadence, then hand the floor to the first speaker. The first toast lands warm and brief, and the room breathes easier and deeper. Stories rise, gratitude passes, and a few eyes shine under the patio lights. However, my chair's presence keeps the head table aligned and the flow clean and respectful. The sponsor representative thanks everyone afterward and praises careful planning that protects comfort and safety. He nods at the binder and remarks that clarity always makes generosity land better, and he closes with a small promise to support next year's improvements without conditions attached. The room applauds gently, and the night resumes its calm, neighborly rhythm again. I clear the carving board, wipe the knife, and set it guarded on linen. However, the late heavy blow arrives when Lena posts a photo to the thread. The image frames the head table without my chair, cropped to erase presence completely. My chest tightens, then steadies, then cools as I study the erasure's clean edges, and I taste metal for a breath, then let the feeling pass without audience or flair. Brent steps beside Lena and taps a heart on the image with a relaxed grin. Nora leans in and adds a caption about seamless hosting and sponsor-first collaboration. However, a neighbor across from me glances at the binder, then at the real table. He looks back at the image, then back at the chair holding my plate. And his mouth presses thin as he pockets his phone and resumes quiet conversation. The silence cuts deeper than any argument could, because truth sits visible and ignored. I sit, place the napkin across my lap, and finish the glass of water slowly. However, I accept that some losses never ask permission and never apologize afterward. I collect the trash quietly, replace a bag, and tie a neat square knot. The motions feel like stitching a seam that's split, even if fabric stays scarred. And I choose not to confront the photo, because oxygen feeds fires best unseen. A child returns a spoon he borrowed, and I thank him and tap the table. He beams, pockets the thanks, and runs toward the lawn where fireflies start. However, the pocketed thanks makes a small opening where bitterness could have stayed. The sponsor representative approaches and asks privately if I need anything else tonight. I say we are good, and he nods and offers a card for later, and he adds that his firm prefers houses with clear owners, not committees with clipboards. The line lands gently and sits there like a tool placed within easy reach. However, I do not move toward it, because leverage used early can backfire. I sweep crumbs into my palm, wipe the board again, and breathe through my nose. The playlist turns softer as the crowd thins, and the evening cools further by degrees, and I feel my hands unclench fully for the first time all day. The driveway remains clear, the cones unbent, the reserved sign right where I set it. The head table keeps its symmetry, and my chair now looks inevitable, not contested. However, fatigue arrives hard, like a pack dropped at the end of a march. I accept it and let posture soften, because pride needs rest to stay useful. And I make a short list for morning: return rentals, log expenses, reset timers. The night will end without spectacle, and that is the victory chosen tonight. However, The late heavy blow still vibrates through the quiet, like a plucked wire. I glance once toward Lena and Brent, who laugh with friends near the porch. Their laughter carries the shine of performance and the hollowness of a stage after curtain, and I refuse to absorb what they will not own, which keeps me standing. A final neighbor stops by my chair and thanks me for the lane and order. She says older knees appreciated clear paths and quiet timing more than confetti. However, she adds that the cropped photo will confuse people who could not attend. I nod, say documentation will circulate tomorrow, and she touches my shoulder kindly, then leaves. And I feel the room loosen again, like a knot acknowledging a patient pull. Dishes stack, chairs fold, and voices thin to a low murmur across the yard. The porch light steadies, the amp disappears, the second mic returns to its bag. However, the thread still shows the cropped image holding steady, like a claim staked. I slide the binder into a satchel and tuck the certified deed behind the flap, and I wash the carving knife by hand, dry it, and set it to rest. The wind shifts and pushes cooler air through the fence slats and across my face. My breath deepens, and the tremor stays gone, replaced by clean, even steadiness. However, forgiveness will not arrive tonight, and that is fine because boundaries did. I close the cooler, latch it, and set it back against the east fence. The cones stay in position because night drivers respect objects more than requests sometimes, and I turn off the lantern and test the porch circuit with a fingertip press. The lights hold, the yard exhales, the last guests wave and drift toward their cars. However, the cropped image remains posted and liked, and nothing I do changes it. I accept that and put away the clipboard someone left near the head table. The board still smells like cedar oil from the workshop and holds a clean grain, and I think of morning coffee and a quiet ledger and a cooler room. A faint lever appears when the sponsor representative texts a single line of thanks. He adds a photo of the full table with my chair in clear view. However, he leaves it unposted and asks whether I want it shared tomorrow. I pocket the phone and stare at the yard until my breath finds center again. And I consider the leverage and the cost, then choose to answer after sunrise. I wake before sunrise and feel a clean, hard line inside. The house sits quiet, yet last night's cropped image still needles behind my eyes. I pour coffee, open the ledger, and title a fresh page, Consequences and Terms. And I map 3 columns for behavior, proof, and outcome, with times stamped clearly. The sponsor's unposted photo waits on my phone like a sealed envelope. I answer his message and request a time-stamped version plus permission to share. However, I also prepare my own correction with documents, so timing cannot be twisted. I draft a brief post that presents facts, not feelings or spin. I attach the certified deed copy, the public permit, and the logistics sheet. And I add the full table photo with my chair centered and labeled. I publish to the same thread where the crop appeared, then lock comments immediately. However, I send the same packet by email to neighbors who avoid social threads. I deliver a short note that records last night's order and safety decisions. I state simple points about access lanes, posted timing, and owner authority on ceremony. And I include a single sentence noting the earlier crop as misleading context. The phone vibrates with read receipts and a trickle of quiet acknowledgments from elders. I file those in a folder labeled Thread Confirmation so memory cannot grow foggy. However, public correction alone changes little unless house rules change with equal clarity. I print a 1-page house agreement for shared obligations, boundaries, and escalating remedies. The first line requires respect at the table, on paper, and in photos. And the second line sets contribution targets with due dates and verification requirements monthly. The third line limits events to signed use agreements with schedules and safety plans. The fourth line assigns authority for music, seating, and drive access to the owner. However, the signature block matters more than any clause when pressure rises later. I set the paper on the workshop bench and square it with the edge. I choose calm ink and sign the owner line with a steady, legible hand. And I leave the second signature blank for the person who keeps avoiding chairs. I change the Wi-Fi password and label the new printout with a date. I reset pairing on the speaker and store the lock key in a small tin. However, I also remove the spare mic batteries and mark the box with inventory counts. I schedule all utilities to paper invoices and redirect notifications to my phone only. The mortgage draft remains paused, and I add a certified letter to the file. And I prepare a new automatic transfer that routes contributions to a separate account. Morning light reaches the driveway and finds tire scuffs where cones held overnight. I pull the cones inside, wipe them clean, and stack them by the garage wall. However, I leave the reserved sign at the corner because repetition teaches faster than lectures. Brent appears in the doorway with a casual stance practiced for charm over friction. He says the thread looks heavy and suggests we clear the air later tonight. And he adds that sponsors love initiative and that yesterday proved his instincts correct. I answer in measured words that documents now guide our schedule and shared obligations. I hand him the agreement and request his signature by noon with no deflection. However, he smiles thinly and says paperwork can wait until the mood turns friendly. I reply that access to systems and funds now follows signatures, not moods or optics. I watch the smile flatten and his eyes flick toward the speaker and router. And I note that his shoulders tense, like a man hearing a door latch behind him. Lena steps in with tired eyes and says everyone appreciated hosting, done gracefully. She floats the idea that last night's crop simply improved composition for the feed. However, I raise a palm once and point to the posted correction and documents. I state quietly that the crop erased a person, not clutter, and that matters. And I point to the blank line on the agreement where choices must live today. Brent asks whether the sponsor photo could have waited to avoid public embarrassment. He suggests that private handling protects relationships and keeps neighbors comfortable and calm. However, relationships that require erasure to survive are already broken beyond comfort. I deliver the line I saved for the pivot and let it land cleanly. I state, plain and even, dignity in this house is not negotiable. And I hold his eyes for one silent beat so the words settle fully. The room changes temperature without any fan moving or window opening to air. Brent's posture shifts from casual to calculating, while his jaw works behind a smile. However, calculation fails when paper, money flow, and control points already moved yesterday. He asks what happens if he refuses signatures and prefers a looser arrangement again. I point to the second page and trace the remedies column with one finger. And I list outcomes in simple terms, beginning with access limits and ending with relocation. Lena watches my hand and swallows, then scans the utility line marked contributions. She asks whether amounts reflect real costs rather than inflated estimates or punishments. However, I offer the folder of receipts and let her read totals, dates, and vendors. She nods slowly, then stops when she reaches the mortgage line marked paused yesterday. She asks if that means delinquency, foreclosure, or something equally dramatic next month. And I explain calmly that I will pay on time when agreements travel both directions. Brent exhales through his teeth and calls the plan rigid behind a calm tone. He says flexibility builds trust and insists that last night proved his leadership value. However, last night proved only that erasure thrives when no one sits at the table. I lay the certified deed on the bench and slide the permit copy beside it. I add the thread correction, facing up, with timestamps aligned in a neat column. And I fold the carving towels and rest the knife guard on the board in view. He glances at each item and realizes the optics now favor paper, not charm. His shoulders drop, then square, then drop again as the choices sharpen into two. However, he tries one more pass by offering to handle sponsors exclusively going forward. He proposes that I remain the silent foundation while he carries the shiny parts. I let that pass without comment, because silence reveals whether a pitch survives oxygen. And the pitch dies by itself, twitching once, then settling into a small stillness. The phone pings with new replies to the correction and a private thank you. The sponsor confirms public alignment with owner timing and clear safety protocols for events. However, the message also withdraws branding from any committee that resists documented leadership tonight. Lena reads the line, then lowers her head and rubs her brow slowly. She says we should sign now and adjust amounts later if details change. and she reaches for a pen and writes her name with neat, decisive strokes. Brent hesitates, then asks whether co-signing locks him into contributions he cannot meet. I answer that signatures set expectations and that extensions require requests, not assumptions. However, I add that unapproved cropping, unilateral schedules, and blocked access lanes end immediately. He signs, presses the point too hard, and leaves a small dent at the tail. The pen mark looks like a nicked board, fixable but obvious to practiced eyes, and I countersign the finalized agreement and slip copies into labeled envelopes. I hand them each a copy and place ours in the binder behind proofs. However, agreements without immediate action ring hollow, so I begin resets while they watch. I roll the speaker cart to the closet and lock the cabinet with a labeled tag. I post the new event protocol near the pantry and the porch light switch, and I move the extra folding chairs back to storage, leaving the head table untouched. Brent suggests removing the reserved sign because neighbors might think we feel unfriendly. However, friendliness without access is theater, and theater already cost me one evening. I keep the sign and add a small reflective strip for dusk clarity at curb. Lena gathers receipts, asks for a calendar copy, and sets reminders on her phone. She says she will prepare a monthly summary so numbers stay shared and boring, and she texts a short apology to the thread acknowledging the earlier crop as misleading. The thread warms slightly, then settles into quiet with a few simple acknowledgments. However, Nora posts a light complaint about control and calls the new rules excessive. I answer once with 3 sentences citing the permit, safety lane, and owner authority. I add that committee roles remain welcome within posted structure and signed agreements only. And I let the thread go quiet again, because arguments eat time without feeding outcomes. The day advances, and the house starts to feel like level ground again. I wash the carving knife, oil the hinge on the pantry, and reset the grill cover. However, I also photograph the signed pages and email copies to my attorney for record. I schedule a follow-up with the recorder's office to file the event protocol addendum. I update insurance notes to reflect formal event terms and limited third-party access. And I add a rider that excludes unsanctioned gear and unapproved amplification devices entirely. Brent hovers at the doorway and asks whether sponsors will feel pushed away. Now, I say sponsors prefer clarity over chaos because money hates fog more than heat. However, he looks unconvinced until a second sponsor note arrives praising the correction. He reads it twice, then pockets his phone without a word and rubs his neck. And I feel the line inside me soften slightly because friction finally met reality. Afternoon brings returns and small errands that stitch a day back together neatly. I deliver borrowed platters, thank neighbors for patience, and accept leftover desserts graciously. However, I skip any talk about last night beyond logistics because gossip feeds confusion fast. I walk the driveway and chalk a clean line where cones will sit next time. I paint a small curb hash for emergency clearance and log the material costs. And I staple the use agreement template to a clipboard labeled Events. Then, hang it. The house feels lighter now, like a room after someone opens a long-stuck window. I brew fresh coffee and stand in the workshop doorway, letting the smell settle. However, calm needs anchoring, so I run the checklist twice and cross off each line. Brent reappears with a folded chair and places it at the head table quietly. He says he will adjust future charts and clear sponsor language with me beforehand. And he adds that the lane will stay open even when guests grumble about distance. I nod once and thank him without flourish, because compliance should breathe like normal air. Lena asks for tomorrow's schedule and offers to handle 2 errands before dinner. However, I assign just one and ask her to rest because fatigue distorts judgment. She smiles a little and says she understands why clarity sometimes sounds strict, and she mentions that elders already messaged thanks for the correction and the lanes. The sun lowers and the kitchen cools as shadows lengthen across the tiles. I wipe the counters, rinse the sink, and fold towels into clean thirds. However, the thread still shows last night's crop, though it trails behind the correction now. I leave it alone because the full table will outlive a flattering lie posted once. I sit at the head table and straighten the plate until the edge reads true. I rest my hands flat and breathe, letting the steadiness expand through shoulders and chest, and I feel the righteous heat drain, replaced by an even, durable calm. The sponsor messages again and asks permission to post his full photo publicly. He offers a caption crediting owner leadership and safe planning that protects comfort gracefully. However, I ask him to wait until morning so people read without late-night churn. He agrees, thanks me, and mentions a small donation for neighborhood safety materials. And I add cones and reflective tape to a short list pinned near the door. Evening arrives quiet, with no devices squealing and no sudden optics overrunning plans. I lock the cabinet, close the workshop, and switch the porch light to steady. However, I leave the binder on the table where it can anchor tomorrow's breakfast. I pour one last cup and watch the yard darken into a calm, ordinary space. I remember last night's silence after the crop and note the weight now gone. And I accept that justice rarely looks dramatic when done correctly and completely. The ledger page for today shows actions, signatures, and clean outcomes without drama. The remedies column holds check marks instead of threats or half-promises and sighs. However, a small aftermatter remains in the edges, like a tremor under fresh paint. I feel it near the door, faint but present, asking for something quieter than victory. I rinse the mug, leave it handle left, and turn the deadbolt with a soft click. I breathe once more at the table I refuse to surrender, then stand slowly. And I notice how the room feels level, not grand, and finally fair again. Morning opens quiet and ordinary, and my breath settles without effort or instruction. The house holds stillness like a well-made bed, corners neat and square. I move lighter than yesterday, with jaw unclenched and shoulders easy at last, and I set water to boil, rinse the chipped mug, and smile small. The ledger waits but does not demand, because today belongs to presence first. I review the signed pages once, then slide them into the binder. However, I resist the urge to reread replies because calm grows by restraint. Sunlight lands across the table and turns crumbs into harmless specks of gold. I wipe them once and leave the cloth folded in clean thirds. And I text Lena a time and place that invites talk without theater. The diner opens early, and the corner booth offers shade and privacy. I drive over slow, park straight, and let the engine tick into silence. However, I pause before stepping out, choosing gentleness over victory and noise. The bell over the door clicks, and the place smells like coffee and griddle. I take the booth that faces the wall, steadying my breath between sips. And I stack the salt and pepper, aligning them because order steadies words. Lena arrives looking tired, but present, and I nod once with an open palm. I speak simply about next steps and the steadiness we will protect together. However, I keep sentences short, and I leave room for her answers to land. She explains plans to shoulder regular errands and to keep receipts in order. She agrees to monthly contributions posted on time with verification and summaries. And she suggests a first Sunday check-in for schedules, expenses, and upcoming obligations. I accept the proposal and add a clear rule about photos and captions. We state that no one edits people out to polish optics or gain approval. However, I keep my voice level because grace breathes easier when pride loosens. We define an event list that requires permits, sign-offs, and safety maps beforehand. We agree that music routes through one device, labeled, locked, and scheduled responsibly. And we set driveway lanes as permanent, not negotiable, under any social pressure. She asks about Nora's role, and I offer a small boundary with options. Nora may handle sign-in sheets and greetings, not schedules, chairs, or lanes. However, I add that goodwill remains welcome when it respects posted structure fully. We assign Brent to logistics with measurable tasks and no control over ceremony. We place contributions on autopay the same morning the summaries go out. And we mark the head table seat as fixed because consistency protects dignity quietly. The waitress pours refills and smiles, and we let the silence breathe without strain. Lena admits the crop did harm, and she intends to own that publicly. However, I meet that admission with a nod, not a lecture, because growth needs space. We trade calendars, align recurring errands, and post reminders with alarms and labels. We agree that requests come early, not 5 minutes before a task begins. And we write a simple sentence together that clarifies quiet support, beats flashy gestures. The diner noise is soft and human, and my shoulders drop a little further. I mention the attorney file and the insurance writer without weight or threat. However, I clarify those files exist to keep conflict small, not to escalate it. She asks about house projects, and I suggest simple Saturdays repairing small things together. We pick the porch hinge and the loose fence cap as next week's targets, and we schedule a shared list, 2 items per week, checked and filed. A couple in the next booth laughs gently, and the sound lands without sting. I pay the bill and leave a note that thanks the staff for steadiness. However, I do not hurry out, because unhurried steps teach nerves to relax. We walk to the lot and pause at the curb for a breath. I say our check-ins will hold, even when moods shift or schedules squeeze, and I add that kindness will count as compliance only when actions follow. She nods, and the nod looks real, not rehearsed or shaped for cameras. However, I leave room for proof over time, because promises are easy in daylight. We part with light steps and a plan that fits inside ordinary days. The drive home feels shorter, and the yard looks like level ground again. And the kitchen air carries only coffee and soap, not old friction or smoke. I open the binder, file the diner notes, and label today with a clean tag. I set a calendar card on the fridge that shows our first Sunday meetings. However, I keep the card small, because boundaries work best when they breathe. The sponsor posts the full photo with a measured caption about clarity and safety. I share it once without commentary, then mute notifications to protect the quiet. And I send a private thanks to the representative for following the plan gracefully. The thread stays calm, and neighbors respond with simple acknowledgments and nothing more. Nora posts a brief note about welcoming guests within posted guidelines going forward. However, I do not chase tone or polish, because compliance matters more than charm. Brent forwards a delivery screenshot confirming cones and reflective tape arriving by Friday. He asks for the updated playlist file and confirms he will not edit it. And I email the file with fixed timing, then archive the thread without hovering. Afternoon light cools across the porch, and tools sit ready on the bench. I oil the hinge that squealed last week and test the swing until quiet. However, I pause before reaching for another task, choosing to value stillness today. I take a long walk along the block and greet neighbors without explanations. I thank one elder for last night's steady eyes when confusion tried to spread, and I let gratitude appear in actions instead of paragraphs or neat speeches. The mailbox holds a flyer from the city about emergency lanes and summer safety. I post it neatly near the doorbell where visitors can actually read it. However, I resist the urge to highlight lines because the flyer speaks well enough. I brew tea and sit at the head table without any ceremony or camera. I straighten the plate, then leave it alone, because habit needs rest too. And I feel the room give back a little warmth that does not burn. The thread remains quiet, and my phone rests face down beside the binder. I focus on the taste of tea and the rhythm of steady breaths. However, I allow one memory of long nights when quiet checklists kept us moving. That memory arrives without hardness and leaves without scraping old ribs or pride. I draft a brief note for the fridge titled, "How We Handle Frictions," and I write 4 lines about early notice, documented changes, and respectful tones. I add a 5th line about cooling off walks when heat rises too quickly. However, I avoid heavy words because simple language survives stress better than slogans. I text Lena a photo of the note and a thumbs up to confirm. She replies with a calendar screenshot and a promise to send receipts weekly, and she adds a picture of fresh batteries for the flashlight drawer by the door. Evening drifts in with a mild breeze that moves curtains just a little. I grill 2 small pieces of fish and steam greens with lemon and salt. However, I set an extra plate and leave it empty without any message. I eat slowly and clear the dishes, then place the extra plate away. And I recognize that welcome lives in stability now, not in constant availability. I step onto the porch and listen to sprinklers pulse down the street. The driveway shows clean lines and room to turn without risk or argument. However, I keep the reserved sign visible because clarity serves strangers as much as family. A text arrives from Nora asking about a committee meeting on Thursday evening. I reply with the new use form and a short reminder about lanes and chairs, and I add that I appreciate her greetings and her energy when focused well. Another message arrives from Brent with a simple thank you and no flourish at all. He attaches a draft schedule that follows the template without additions or surprises. However, I reply tomorrow morning, because urgency can be another name for pressure. I clean the sink, fold the towel, and leave the counter dry and clear. I lock the cabinet with the speaker and set the key in its tin, and I place the binder flat on the table where morning light will find it. The house feels like itself again, neither stage nor battleground, just lived-in space. I notice how my steps land lighter and how breathing stays easy without reminders. However, I accept that vigilance will remain, though softer than yesterday, and kinder. The night sky darkens, and a few porch lights blink on down the block. I sit a moment longer and let quiet teach the room its own pace, and I decide that tomorrow's work will be ordinary and exactly enough. The plan includes the porch hinge check and the fence cap we chose earlier. It includes the first Sunday card and the receipts folder Lena promised today. However, it also includes a walk after dinner and a call to an old friend. I turn off the porch light and listen once to the house settling into rest. I thank whatever steadies old bones and tempers old heat into measured warmth, and I grant Lena space to prove her changes slowly, one receipt at a time. Forgiveness lives here as a door kept unlocked for people who knock respectfully. However, forgiveness will not carry anyone. People carry themselves, and boundaries keep paths clear. Gratitude is action, not captions, and human value does not depend on optics. And bounded forgiveness honors both love and limits, so hope can grow without getting lost.